CNN publishes a story citing 3 U.S. intelligence sources with a claim that should have made every front page on the planet. China, the same country that helped broker the ceasefire between the United States and Iran just 3 days ago, is now preparing to ship shoulder-fired air defense missiles to Tehran, not through official channels, through third countries, routed to mask the origin, timed to arrive, while the ceasefire is still in effect. The systems in question are man-portable air defense systems, shoulder-fired missiles that one person can operate, the exact category of weapon that President Trump himself said was used to shoot down an American F-15 over Iranian airspace last week. Beijing immediately denied it. A spokesperson for the Chinese embassy in Washington called the intelligence untrue and said China has never provided weapons to any party in the conflict. But here is what that denial leaves out, and it changes everything about how you should understand China's role in this war. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what China has already shipped to Iran before this ceasefire began, why the new man-portable air defense shipment is strategically different from everything that came before, and what it tells us about Beijing's real calculation in this conflict. Because the mainstream media is presenting China as a responsible peacemaker. What I am about to show you is a country running 2 operations at the same time, one in front of the cameras and one behind them. And the math behind both operations reveals a strategy that neither Washington nor Tehran fully controls. Let me start with what China actually did to broker this ceasefire, because the diplomatic effort was real, and understanding it is the key to understanding why the weapons shipment matters so much. When the war began on February 28th, China's initial response was cautious. Beijing called for an immediate stop to military operations and urged all parties to prevent the conflict from spreading. Foreign Minister Wang Yi made 26 phone calls to counterparts across the region, including 2 calls to Iran's foreign minister. China's special envoy for the Middle East traveled to the region for direct mediation. Then, on March 31st, China and Pakistan jointly released a 5-point peace initiative calling for an immediate ceasefire, the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, and the start of formal negotiations. According to the New York Times, citing 3 Iranian officials, it was a last-minute push from Beijing that ultimately convinced Tehran to accept Pakistan's 2-week ceasefire proposal on April 7th. Trump himself confirmed China's role, telling Agence France-Presse that he believed China was responsible for persuading Iran to come to the negotiating table. Pakistan's prime minister called China's support invaluable. The White House confirmed that high-level talks between the U.S. and China took place as the ceasefire negotiations were finalized. So the mediation was not theater. Beijing applied real leverage, and it worked. Now here is the part that should concern every defense planner in the Pentagon. According to U.S. intelligence, while those diplomatic calls were happening, while Wang Yi was being praised as a peacemaker, Beijing was at the same time preparing to transfer man-portable air defense systems to Iran through third-country routes designed to hide their origin. And this is not the first time China has supplied Iran with weapons during this conflict. According to Reuters, a $5 billion oil for weapons deal was signed between China and Iran before the war escalated, covering CM-302 supersonic anti-ship cruise missiles, HQ-9B long-range air defense batteries, HQ-16B surface-to-air missile systems, 1,200F N6 man-portable air defense systems, kamikaze drones, counter-battery radars, and tracking systems. According to reports, much of that hardware was destroyed by U.S. and Israeli strikes in the opening days of the conflict. The CM-302 anti-ship missiles, which China markets as carrier killers capable of sinking a destroyer, were intercepted by American SM-3 and SM-6 missiles, or malfunctioned in flight. The HQ-9B batteries, deployed on Iranian nuclear sites, failed to protect those installations. In other words, $5 billion worth of Chinese military hardware was neutralized in a matter of days. But here is why the new shipment is different, and why it matters more than the $5 billion package that came before it. Man-portable air defense systems are not strategic weapons. They do not defend nuclear sites or sink aircraft carriers. A man-portable air defense system is a shoulder-fired missile that one person can carry, conceal, and launch from virtually anywhere. It weighs about 16 kilograms. It fits in a backpack. It costs between $30,000 and $80,000 per unit. And it is designed to do one thing: destroy low-flying aircraft, the helicopters, transport planes, and fighter jets that operate at altitudes below 15,000 feet. Now consider the cost equation. An American F-15 Eagle costs roughly $100 million. It requires thousands of hours of maintenance, a trained pilot who represents years of investment, and a logistics chain that stretches across the globe. A man-portable air defense system that costs $50,000 can destroy all of it in a single shot. That is a 2,000 to 1 cost ratio in the attacker's favor. Read that again. And unlike the CM-302 missiles that failed against American naval defenses, man-portable air defense systems have already proven effective in this conflict. Trump confirmed during a press conference on Monday that the F-15 shot down over Iran last week was hit by what he called a handheld shoulder missile, a heat-seeking missile. Iran confirmed it used a new air defense system without providing details. If that system was Chinese manufactured, and the intelligence now suggests a new batch is being prepared for delivery, then China is not just arming Iran. China is providing the specific weapon that has already demonstrated the ability to destroy American aircraft in this theater. So here's the strategic picture that nobody in Washington or Beijing wants to discuss openly. China is running a dual-track operation. Track one is diplomatic. Beijing positions itself as a responsible major power, a peacemaker with the credibility to bring both sides to the table. This track protects China's international reputation, maintains the diplomatic channel with Washington ahead of Trump's planned visit to Beijing next month, and earns goodwill across the Middle East. Track 2 is military. Beijing continues to supply Iran with defensive weapon systems, routing them through third countries to maintain deniability. According to CNN sources, China sees no strategic value in overtly entering the conflict, which Beijing knows would be unwinnable. Instead, China is positioning itself as a continued friend to Iran, whose oil it depends on, while remaining outwardly neutral so it can maintain deniability after the war is over, and Beijing can make one additional argument that differentiates its support from Russia's. Air defense systems are defensive, not offensive. China is not helping Iran attack anyone. China is helping Iran defend itself. That distinction may sound like semantics, but in diplomatic terms, it is the difference between being labeled a co-belligerent and being labeled a concerned partner providing humanitarian defense assistance. Moscow, by contrast, has reportedly been sharing intelligence with Iran that has helped Tehran proactively target U.S. troops and assets, a far more direct form of involvement. But Washington is not ignoring this. On April 8th, one day after the ceasefire was announced, Trump posted on Truth Social that any country supplying military weapons to Iran would face immediate 50% tariffs on all goods sold to the United States, with no exclusions or exemptions. He did not name China directly. He did not need to. The message was clear. The problem is that analysts immediately questioned whether Trump could enforce such tariffs. The Supreme Court struck down his use of emergency economic powers for broad tariffs in February, and with a state visit to Beijing planned for next month, a trade war with China over Iranian weapons would threaten the very diplomatic relationship that helped produce the ceasefire in the first place. And that is the trap. China brokered the ceasefire that Washington needed. China is now arming the adversary that Washington is fighting, and Washington cannot punish China for the second without destroying the first. Beijing has positioned itself so that confronting its weapons transfers means losing its diplomatic cooperation, and accepting its diplomatic cooperation means tolerating its weapons transfers. That is not a contradiction. That is leverage, and it is the most sophisticated strategic play any country has made in this conflict so far. So here is the question that matters right now. The ceasefire is 2 weeks long. High-level talks are underway in Islamabad between U.S. and Iranian delegations. The Strait of Hormuz is supposed to reopen. And somewhere, according to 3 U.S. intelligence sources, Chinese man-portable air defense systems are being prepared for shipment to Iran through third-country routes, timed to arrive while the guns are still silent. If the ceasefire holds, those weapons sit in warehouses and become a problem for the next crisis. If the ceasefire collapses, those weapons are already in position, and American aircraft operating over the Persian Gulf face a threat that has already proven it can bring down a $100 million fighter jet. China brokered the peace. China is arming the war. And the question nobody in Washington can answer is whether those are 2 separate strategies or 2 parts of the same one. Share this video because the mainstream media is celebrating China's peacemaking role without telling you about the intelligence indicating weapons shipments. They are not connecting the ceasefire diplomacy to the man-portable air defense transfers. They are not explaining the cost equation that makes a $50,000 missile a strategic threat to a $100 million aircraft. They are showing you the handshake. I just showed you what is in the other hand. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think China is playing peacemaker or arms dealer? Or has Beijing figured out how to be both at the same time?